That's probably 19–20 pound, that fish. So you join me here today at the beautiful Larford Lakes near Styleport. We're here today to run through a tactic that's completely taken over the scene of match fishing the last sort of decade or so, and that's the method feeder. I'll run you through how I personally like to fish the method feeder, the baits I use, the setup I use, and how I go about fishing it. Hopefully we get amongst some great big monsters that Larford's known for, and we catch a few fish today. So let's run you through how I like to fish, and hopefully we catch a few fish along the way. So hopefully today I'm going to run you through a few tips that you can incorporate into your own fishing. Hopefully you take a few bits away from today. But first of all, I'm going to run you through the bait selection. So here at Larford Lakes, obviously it's fishery pellets only. So I've got some 2mm micro pellets here. It's probably, you know, the number one bait these days for the method feeder. Pellets are what fish on commercials are used to eating. Carp in particular just love these 2mm pellets. Loads of attraction, quite sort of heavy as well, so don't get wafted around too much. It's sort of as much as ground bait if you like. Catch decent fish, and yeah, that's probably the number one bait to use around a feeder. My tip's just gone round actually, I think. Yeah, there we go. So what I've done today, obviously we are coming into springtime, but it sort of changes how I like to prepare my pellets for the feeder. So because it is absolutely, we're pretending it's springtime, but it's absolutely freezing, so that changes how I prepare the pellets for the feeder. In the summer months, they don't take very long to expand and take on the water, so you've got to be quite careful how long you soak them in the summer. In the winter, they could take a really long time to actually get to the right stage where you can put them around the feeder. So all I do, ideally you want to prepare them before you get to the venue, but today all I did was I tipped them into a bucket and I just covered them with, well, not even enough water to cover the pellets. And I kept coming back to them and just mixing them around, rather than sort of let them sit for too long, if you like, that they can sort of become too stodgy if you're not too careful. But at the same time, because it's winter, they can take quite a long time to expand and get sticky enough for the feeder. In the summer months, however, you know, on a normal day, I'd probably soak the pellets for sort of a minute to 2 minutes, maybe 90 seconds, drain off the water, and then 20 minutes later they're ready to go. But in winter, you've got to be a little bit more careful of how you go. A lot of it's sort of trial and error, really. Like I said today, all I've done is just covered it with a little bit of water, not enough to cover the pellets, and I've just kept on mixing it around, just so all the pellets are sort of evenly coated in enough water. And then I've left it for an hour or so, and they've been spot on, to be fair. And then all I've done after that is added a bit of my favourite bait booster. Looks like a nice fish. It just keeps them sort of sticky and a sort of nice consistency to use around the feeder. And obviously it's full of that flavour that these fish home in on. But we'll come back to flavours and things in a minute. We'll just concentrate on getting this fish in. Oh, nice big common, that one. Oh yes, that's a lovely specimen lake fish, that one. Love these really big fish in here. When you get a big common like that, oh, that's probably close to 20 pound actually. You get these really dark commons with big scales on them, and they're pretty impressive to look at actually. we have got a big mat behind us to deal with some of these big fish, but it might let me hold it for the camera. Look at that. That's probably 19-20 pound, that fish. Beautiful fish, one that this lake's pretty famous for. So hopefully we get a few more fish like this, and I'll run you through a few more tips. Let's put him back. Now we've just put that fish back and we've been rudely interrupted, I might as well run you through the rod setup and gear I'm using today before I go back to the bait. So, typical commercial, you know, a lot of the time I'm opting for a 10-foot Superior X. This one's an 11-foot because we're fishing on a big lake today. Don't really very often need a 12-foot rod for this lake because I can sort of reach the middle with this rod with quite ease, to be fair. But on bigger lakes I'll opt for a 12-foot, maybe even a distance master on big lakes like Boston and stuff. But today we've got 11-foot, so I can fish sort of any way if you like. I can drop it under my rod, along the bank or out in the middle, no problem. £6 or 8 sinking feeder mono. I think I've got £8 today. Yeah, I mean, fish with a massive fish, so you don't really want to risk it with light main lines. You just simply don't need to. So a nice durable main line like that. And then today I've just opted for the standard small size ICS method feeder, sort of the most popular size. I'll come back to sort of feeder choice and that, but I will up sizes probably throughout the day, maybe have a little bit of a play, but that's sort of the go-to feeder if you like. And today, because we're allowed to, we're using an elasticated stem, so I've got the standard stem that comes with a 12 hollow in there, simply because when you're fishing sort of along an edge, or when there's a lot of fish in the peg, you can fish a slack line then, and basically the feeder fishes itself, because the fish will bolt against the feeder and it'll be on basically, and all you have to do is pick the rod up and sort of reel into it. I will come back to it, but on other venues I will fish in line, depending on what's in the lake. But today we're fishing for sort of big fish like the one I've just caught. So I've got 017 power line, hook length 4 inches, and I'll fish either a 14 KKH or a size 12. I've got them here. A size 12 MCMB, which is sort of a slight circle hook if you like. Preston have done sort of that sort of hook for years, and not many people have known about it, but they're great hook choice. Sort of when I am fishing for big fish like today, I'll up for size 12 or even a 10, but my go-to hook is probably that size 12 KKH, sort of a standard sort of curved hook, but importantly it's really strong, and that's sort of really important when you're fishing a method feeder with short hook lengths. You're putting a lot of strain on your gear, so you need a heavy, reliable kit that's not going to let you down. Today, all I've got on is a band on a hair like that, and I can fish multiple hook baits with that. Obviously, I will sort of, if I was fishing bandams alone, I'd probably opt for a bayonet, but today, with that band, I can band a bandam or a pellet, or I could either band some maggots, which is a great hook bait. And it means I don't have to change my hook length. I can use multiple baits on one hook length if you like. I don't have to mess around too much. So that's simple really, and that's my setup. But I might as well get the rod in the water and I'll come back to bait choice. And you can see today we're using bandams, and you can see there's not many yellow ones left, so that's my favourite colour. I think I'll opt for a washed out one, save me yellow ones for later. All I'm doing is banding a bandam. Oh, twist it around my rod. There we go. I'm just banding a bandam and simply fishing with 2mm fishery pellets around the feeder. Like I said, I'll come back to the bait I'm using and how I'm going to load the feeder in a minute. I'm just going to get this rod out. There we go. There we go. Loosen the clutch while I'm talking to you so I don't lose my rod. It's also worth a mention the sort of setup I've got today. I've got a rear gripper rest. It's going to hold on to my rod if I do get an aggressive bite. So it grips the rod really nicely. I've also got a rest at the front that's going to be nice and secure. It's not going anywhere. Everything's nice and tight. So if I do get an aggressive bite, it's not going to pull my rod in basically. It's also worth mentioning I like quite a short rod arm when I'm fishing a method feeder. Oh, there's a bite. Oh, has it come off? Yeah, so I like to fish a short method feeder arm, basically because like you just saw there, you get quite aggressive bites. And I want the bite to take up the sort of full action of the rod. I think if you've got a rod rest too close to your rod tip, it's sort of, you risk getting cracked off on the bite a lot of the time because there's not enough sort of give in the rod. So a nice short rod rest, all nice and secure. And yeah, just nice and comfortable on the bank. So a lot of the time you can be waiting for bites. It doesn't look like we are today. So everything's nice and tidy. And hopefully the fish are going to let me talk her through a few more bait choices. So, like I mentioned before, 2mm pellets, go-to feed if you like. Flavour them today with a bit of bait booster. Quite often you find different venues respond to different flavours. Venues like this in particular, it's carp fish quite a lot, so they see sort of flavours of boilies and they respond to different flavours. Sort of more so than sort of a bog standard commercial fishery if you like. So flavours can be really effective, especially like today. The water's quite coloured. I've been doing a few renovations on the lake and it's made the water quite coloured, so using strong flavours can be really good. So we've used that Power Scopex today. It seems to be working. Other options, I've got some 4mm fishery pellets. Sometimes using a heavier bait like 4mm can be really effective when there's a lot of fish in the peg, and it's something a little bit different and not many people do it. I've done it for as long as I can remember, to be fair, but I've never really sort of known why it works. But I think it's just because it's sort of a heavy bait on the bottom, and then if you present your sort of lighter hook bait over the top, then they can't fail but take it in if you like, really. So 4mm pellets can be a nice little alternative. And also I can't fish a method without having a bit of match method mix set up. This mix, I remember when it came out and the first time I used it I broke a fishery a venue record. First time I've used it, and ever since I can't stop using it. It's just the perfect ground bait for the method feeder. You even get a free method with it, which should be spot on today to be fair. And it's just a nice sort of mix, nice consistency, and it's perfect for the method feeder. If I was sort of targeting a few more, well, perhaps open water, and I was targeting a mixture of carp and bream, I'd probably incorporate this into the mix, maybe fish 50-50 with fishery pellets, 2mm and ground bait, and that way it just sort of hedges my bets. The ground bait's got all the attraction, it's going to attract skimmers, but you've also got the sort of 2mm there to give them a bit of feed, and it sort of hedges your bets for skimmers and carp if you like. But also, we know how effective ground bait can be in the margins, so today I've got the option of also fishing a bait up feeder like this, putting loads of bait in the margins, and sometimes that can really work to draw fish in. Obviously we're getting a few bites today, so probably won't need to employ the ground bait down the margins, but it's always an option I like to have. Then coming up to the hook baits, I mentioned Bandams. We've got some 6mm here. I've just got a pot with a complete mixture. There's some fluoro ones, some washed out ones, few yellow Power Scopex ones. I just put them all in one pot. Obviously I need to top up the yellow ones because they've been the most popular this winter. And I mentioned bream and skimmers and other species, so I've got some micro bandams if I want to drop down and fish one of those on the hook if I'm struggling for bites, then that's a great option. I've also got maggots and corn. Obviously I mentioned a bait up feeder, we could even feed a few maggots in the margins with a bait up feeder and fish a method over the top, but maggots is a great sort of hook bait for the method feeder. Whether it's 1, 2, 3 maggots on the hook, that can be really effective. And also I've got a bit of corn with me, just sort of a change hook bait, and also, like I said, if I feed the margins, I've got the option of feeding a bit of corn down there too. So that's it for bait really. Also worth a mention while I'm here, I mentioned about flavours and things. So I've not so much in summer if you like, but sort of winter, spring, when the water's a bit more cooler or coloured like today, using flavours and additives can be really effective. Like I said, I flavoured my pellets with Power Scopex today, but also a great option is to sort of drizzle a bit of haze over the top of the feeder before you cast out. You'll be amazed how much that can draw fish in. You create a little bit of a cloud in the water, but also there's that flavour coming off the feeder as it goes down. It can be particularly effective in sort of big open venues where you sort of draw in fish into your peg. That could be a brilliant way of drawing a few fish. So that's pretty much it for bait choices, nice and simple. I'll leave this out a little bit longer, I'll recast and then I'll run you through a few more tips. So before I cast out again, I'm going to run you through different ways you can load a method feeder. See, this bit's quite important because basically everyone on the bank's fishing the same feeder, normally the same hook bait pretty much, and the way you load the feeder is what makes all the difference sometimes, if you like. So a lot of the time I've got to think how I want my hook bait to be presented on the feeder and how fast I'm getting bites. If I'm fishing for F1s and things and I want a really quick bite, then all I do is I lay the hook bait straight in the feeder, sprinkle the pellets on top, and then push my feeder into the mould, click the button, and it's good to go. And that presents the hook bait on top, so I'm able to get a really quick bite. The only downside to that today is we're probably waiting a bit longer for bites. We're fishing for bigger fish that can waft it around, and that hook bait will sort of fall off the side, and sort of there's potential there for it to be sort of forgotten about, if you like, and they'll go for the main ball rather than the hook bait. So today what I'm doing is I'm using that same sort of setup, if you like, but I'm refilling the mould, so I'm sort of giving it a double skin, but importantly I'm burying that hook bait in amongst a lot of free offerings so it's not going to get wafted around, and when a fish does come into that, my hook bait with a bit of luck is going to be near that sort of main ball, and it's going to get sucked up by a big fish. So it's worth thinking about how you load the feeder. Obviously if you're fishing for smaller fish and you want quick bites in shallow water, then sort of you want your hook bait sort of towards the top, if you like, so it's not going to take too long for it to be released. But for bigger fish and you're being more patient, then sort of try and bury it. So there's a few different options to load in your feeder. Let's get it in the water. Alright, so now that's in the water, it's also worth mentioning as well about tailoring your feed pellets and mix for the venue that you fish in. Obviously I've just moulded a feeder, but with 2mm pellets you sort of can't really compact it hard enough, because once it's in the water they break down really fast. And that's why it's really important when you're fishing a deeper venue to make your pellet sticky. So that might mean adding a bit more bait booster to make the mix sticky, or if the venue allows, then I'll add sticky method pellets, because they're a lot more stickier than your sort of bog standard fishery pellets or Fin Perfect pellets. Just mixing a few of them in with your mix can make it really sticky, because it's really important when you're fishing a deep venue. Obviously it takes a long time for your feeder to hit the bottom, so you need a stickier mix to keep your hook bait intact in that feeder in order to get a bite. So it's worth playing around with your mixes, where it's just sometimes just worth adding a bit of ground bait to make it a little bit more sticky. But it's important to play around with your mixes to sort of tailor it to the venue that you're fishing. So it's worth also mentioning now feeder choice. Obviously there's a few different sizes of feeders. We've got the one that we're fishing in it, the sort of bog standard one. We've got the next size up that I like to use on sort of venues like this, or sometimes bream venues. And you've also got your big Bertha one that I like to use down the edge in the summer. There's also a smaller size, if I can get it out somewhere. No. There's also a smaller size down from that one, quite a new one. I think it's called a mini or micro ICS. It's basically the same shape as that, but it's really small. That's great for sort of F1 venues or middle of winter, shallow venues, when you're sort of looking for smaller fish and smaller species and not feeding a lot of bait. But most of the time it's swapping between these two feeders. This one's great for putting a bit more bait in your peg, or like I mentioned before, I quite like you to use that on bream venues where you want a bit more bait going through, just sort of build a peg. But to be fair, for carp most of the time that just seems like the right sort of size, a little parcel of bait for sort of one bite and one fish at a time, if you like. So that's sort of my go-to on most commercial venues, just a small ICS feeder. And they're sort of the feeders I go to. Obviously I mentioned the big one. I'm not sure I think it's an XL one, and it comes with that orange mould. Not many people know it exists, but it's one that I like to use down the edge in the summer. I fish a lot of feeder only venues, and you can't obviously loose feed by hand like we can today, but it's great to put like a great big sort of volume of bait, but still be fishing effectively, if you like, for big fish like this today. So that's a great option for middle of the summer, fishing down the edge. Whether you're pleasure fishing or just fishing a feeder match, that can be a great option. But there are obviously a few more choices. There's obviously XR feeders, like banjo type feeder, which is the same sort of style, but it's got these walls around the outside of it, and that can be great for deeper venues because it keeps the sort of hook bait and bait intact in the feeder. It gives it a chance to reach the bottom, which, like I said before, is really important. So I tend to use that when I'm fishing a big distance. It keeps the bait intact, so I know it's fishing effectively. Deeper venues as well. Oh, getting a line bite. I'll opt for that one sometimes, but because we're coming into spring and summer, I do like to opt for a method feeder instead. I just think it gives it a bit more traction. Oh, there's a liner. Just tighten up into it. I think there's a bit more traction, and I don't actually mind if there's a sort of odd pellet coming off of it as it falls through the water, because I think that draws fish into the peg. Also a standard method feeder, because it's sort of more aerodynamic. I'm watching my tip because I'm getting a lot of line bites. Because it's aerodynamic, I quite like to use it on long distances too. The tip's going to go around in a minute. It's just doing this. I'm getting distracted. You see that? There's obviously a fish there. Tip's just going around. I've actually just dropped it down the edge there, and that's why it's important to fish an elasticated stem. Obviously I'm fishing quite a slack line, but if that was a free running feeder, it wouldn't be fishing as effectively, because I'm getting a lot of liners and a lot of fish in the peg. There, I've just got a slight bend in the tip. It just lets me know what's happening without too much tension there. There's obviously a few fish there. That might be on actually, that one. Worth having a look. Yep. So with elasticated feeder, you can be a bit more patient with it, and just gives you a little bit more time to sort of tell the difference between a line bite and a proper bite. Obviously we had a few indications there, but it just sort of steadily went round and it was pretty obvious that we had a fish on. But at the same time, if that was a free running feeder fishing against an island or down the margins, there's a chance that because you're sort of tightening into it, there's a chance that it's going to fall down the slope a bit more. Nice big mirror, that one. So if I'm fishing on steep banks or down the edge when there's a lot of fish, island pegs, if I'm allowed, I'll opt for an elasticated feeder. But when I'm fishing for F1s and maybe smaller species like skimmers, I'll try and opt for an inline feeder because it lets me see all the little bites. But today we're just looking for big pull rounds like that one and fishing for great big lumps. That was on a wafter again. I'll hold that one up, this is quite a pretty one if he let me. Another chunky fish, gnarly old mirror, lovely fish, lovely mouth on it as well. Ooh, let's put him back. There he goes. So they're pretty much the feeders I like to use and why I use them. Obviously the other option is a pellet feeder, but that's similar to an XR feeder. Just make sure that the bait gets to the bottom. I quite like to use it on deep, really deep venues. But most of the time I opt for an ICS feeder, just like that. I think it's called the small size. I've just got a 20 gram feeder on today. It's worth mentioning the weights of feeders as well. Obviously the ICS one comes in 20, 30, 45, might even be a bigger one. But today, I think there's a 60, yeah, 60, 75 as well, blimey. But today I've just opted for a 20 gram. It's quite important, there's not a great deal of wind at the minute, we'll get out later, but 20 grams just enough to get me to where I need to fish without causing too much commotion. Because a lot of the time if you fish a big heavy feeder like a 30 or a 45, when you don't need to, that can sort of spook fish. And that's not what we want to do when we're catching great big fish like that, because obviously a 20 pound fish or a 10 pound fish can be a big proportion of your weight. So you don't want to be scaring them away. So a nice light feeder like that is perfect today. Nice 20 gram one. Try another wafter. I think we caught that one on a washed out one. I think I'll try a nice bright one today, this time. So the water's quite coloured, so you find quite often that using a bright hook bait like that can be really effective. Then in the summer, when the water's not quite so clear, I tend to find that a washed out bait like that, or a 6mm pellet or an 8mm pellet, just something that blends in with the feed a bit more, can be quite effective. Like I said, today I'm just double skinning it, so that hook bait's buried in a nice big volume of bait. Obviously you can only put so much bait in that mould, so by sort of giving it a double whammy, you get a nice big volume of bait without using a big feeder. Just give it a nice squeeze before I chuck out. I actually caught that one from the margins, so we'll have another little go down there. Obviously I could be fishing a pole down there today, but on great big venues like this, when there's a lot of wind, a lot of tow, sometimes just fishing a method feeder down the margins or sort of on your short pole line can be a lot more effective. Obviously a big venue like this, it tows a lot, there could be a lot of current going through the water. So fishing a pole, you can often foul hook fish and it can cause you a bit of grief, but by fishing a method feeder, it's down there, it's fishing itself, and all we need to do now is wait and be patient. Hopefully we get a few more bites. So the next thing we need to think about is where to actually fish. During the winter and colder months, I tend to sort of try and target the open water, maybe start short and then work my way out. Not very often I use a clip during the winter, just sort of casting around trying to find one or two fish, find where they are, try different spots in my peg. As we come into the warmer months, oh there's one, I'll then clip up, maybe pick a spot that's comfortable, sort of 30 metres maybe, and try and build a peg. And sometimes by fishing a clip you can sort of draw them into the same spot, and as the session goes on it gets better and better. Also, like you saw there, I was fishing down the edge there, as we're coming into spring, obviously the water's really cold, but if we get a bit of sunshine like we have at the minute, it does warm up really quickly in the shallower areas of the lake, whether it's an island or down the edge. So a lot of the time that could be a great area of the peg to target, especially in the warmer months or in the spring as it warms up a little bit. It's a small one for Special Lake standards. So fishing to margins or islands can be really effective in the spring when it's just starting to warm up. Nice little comment there. But it's also important to remember this time of year the water's not really, it's not a sort of comfortable temperature for the fish to be in the shallow water all the time. So sometimes I think people get carried away with casting really tight to islands, and sometimes it's just that little bit too shallow. So it's quite important to sort of have a play, bit of trial and error. Don't necessarily cast really tight to islands, but just find the sort of depth that the fish feel comfortable at, and that can relate to today. We're fishing down the margins this time. We haven't got an island, but it's really shallow close in, and then it will drop away to sort of 3 or 4 foot, and I'm finding that fish are feeling a bit more comfortable a little bit further away from the bank, and that's why I'm getting a few bites when I'm casting sort of 3 or 4 metres away from the bank, like that. And all I'm doing, I'm not tightening up to the feeder because I've got a feeling there's a few fish down there. I've just locked it into my rest. Importantly, I'm slackening off the clutch. I'm not fishing to a clip because the bites today are going to be savage. All I've got is I've got a marker down the margins, so I know roughly the area. I'm not feeding it too much of a tight spot. If I was fishing further down the bank, sort of 20 metres or so, I might fish to a clip and then just be ready to unclip when I do get a savage bite. And that's when sort of measuring sticks come in, because you can fish to the same spot, unclip. When you do catch one, you can go to your sticks and measure off 20 metres, 30 metres to get to the exact spot again, and then you're fishing without having to sort of cast out and put the clip back on. Obviously back in the olden days, I say olden days, probably 10 years ago, we used to use line markers and knots on the clip to sort of mark where we're fishing, and then we cast out and re-clip on the mark. Oh, that might have been a savage bite then. Line bite, I think. To get back to the mark again. Whereas with a stick, the sticks, oh, here's a fish. With the sticks, you're able to clip up to the same spot without spooking the peg. And you can also fish multiple rods on the same line. Like a lot of feeder matches, I quite often have a feeding rod and one that I'm going to fish with. So I'll have a feeding rod with some heavy braid if it's allowed, and a big bait up feeder like this one. Put a big volume of bait in with that, and then we'll fish a feeder over the top. Obviously if you're a pleasure angler, you don't need to go through all that, because you'll be allowed to loose feed bait like hand, and it might be that you sort of feed balls like this and fish a feeder over the top. Or in the summer months, you might be feeding 8mm pellets or 6mm out into open water, and fishing a method feeder over the top of that can be really effective, especially when fish are grubbing around in the silt. Fishing a method feeder over the top can be a big focal point. It's great for when you're fishing a bomb and feeder over the same line. You can swap and change and see what's best on the day. Sometimes a bomb will work, or sometimes a nice feeder ball with some 2 mils can slip up a big fish like this one. Look at that. Lovely fish. Oh, not doing my back any good. Nice big mirror again. Bottom lip, perfectly hooked. Lovely big fish, slipping straight back. There he goes. As I mentioned before, I'm fishing an elasticated feeder because we're allowed to here today. I'm literally fishing it straight out of the packet, standard one there. Comes with 12 hollow, which to be fair, as we come into the warmer months, I'll probably swap that for maybe a 15 hollow, which is the dark blue one. It's just a bit more durable. So there's the odd rock and bits and bobs around, so it's all right today because it's still cold, but as we get into the warmer months, I'll opt for a heavy one. And you can just tie that yourself, nice and easy. So we've had that from the margins, worth having another go. Still got my bandem on the hook. Give it a nice big pile this time. So when you're fishing like a double skin, it's worth being a little bit more gentle with it, so it keeps intact. And then you push a button a few more times, and then you get sort of a tower of bait. But importantly, it's a nice big volume of bait, nice and positive. Hopefully feed the peg as well. That one's a bit further out from the bank, but that's all right. Hopefully we get another big one. So there's a little run through of different spots that I like to fish. Hopefully we get a few more fish now. So I mentioned before, the hook bait I've been mainly using today is 6mm bandems. We're fishing for big fish today, so a nice big visual hook bait has been really good. But there are obviously other options that I like to carry with me, depending on how the session's going and what I'm fishing for. So if I was struggling today, obviously I've got the option of fishing for bream and skimmers and things. So I could just simply scale down what I'm doing and fish a micro bandem on a hook, scale down my hook length to maybe a 16 or an 18 GPM with a band on the hair again, and fish one of those on the hook, just sort of a scaled down of what I'm doing now. And I can drop down my line diameter as well to sort of 0.13 maybe, 0.15. Wouldn't want to drop too low because there are some big carp in this lake, but obviously it depends on the venue. And if I was fishing for F1s and smaller skimmers, then micro bandems, maggots, small pellets like a 6mm pellet can be a really good option. But there are obviously a few more choices that I like to carry with me. So I've got maggots with me. I can simply just hook them straight on the hook if I've got a few spade ends tied up, or I can use the same hook length that I'm using today. I'll just show you. So I've got my pellet bander here. I'm just putting the bander through the band, which is all twisted up. There we go. Open it up like that, and I can just simply lay 2 or 3 maggots in that band, close it back up, and I've got the option there of fishing maggots without changing my hook length. Obviously the bonus with that is my whole hook bait, whole hook if you like, is exposed. It's not being masked, so I'm more likely to hook the fish like that without the hook point being masked. But I can also just have that set up as it is, but quickly change the maggots or various hook baits like pellets, bandems, whatever, with the same hook bait, hook length if you like. So that's one option. I've got corn with me in clear water. Corn can be a great hook bait, nice and visual, nice and heavy as well. Sometimes when there's a lot of fish in your peg, a heavier hook bait like a grain of corn can be really good because it gets wafted around a little less. But I've also got with me some meat, so I've got my punch kit here. Got a few slices of meat, just the option of fishing a little punch piece of meat on the hook. The plus side to that, it's nice, and it's like using a wafter really, but it's got that nice soft texture and it's nice and smelly too. I like to use quick stops on them, so I'll have a few hook lengths tied up with a quick stop. So there, so I've got quick stops and bayonets and bands, various different things tied up. The other option, whilst I'm on the subject of quick stops, is 4mm expander or a 6mm just on the hook. A lot of people don't realise that you can get away with using really soft hook baits on a method feeder. So I prepare those in a different way than I would be on the pole. I simply soak them with a bit of water but add a lot more of this, and it makes it a lot firmer. It's important to still have that water in for it to sort of soak up and soften up, but by using a bit more of that, you can make it a really sort of tough, durable hook bait that you can use on a method feeder. So here we go, we're into another nice fish. It's been noticeable today that the fish are a bit more active than they have been, and they're responding to a bit more bait, a bit more regular casting. So we've not needed the stopwatch today, although it's worth mentioning that a lot of the time it's really important to keep an eye on your bite time. Sometimes you can get distracted, you don't realise 2 minutes feels like 20 minutes when you're not catching sometimes. So it's really important to sort of see how long it takes to get a bite and what your bite times are, and you'll find a sort of pattern, if you like. Sometimes you'll get bites after 7 minutes, bites after 9 minutes, so you'll know roughly how long to leave it in the water and how often to recast. Like I said today, not needed to because we're catching great big fish like that, and we've had a brilliant session here today. Let's put this one back. Hopefully you've taken away a few hints and tips to help you catch a few fish next time you fish a method feeder. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe Preston YouTube channel for more fishing content.